5 real supernatural encounters that defy explanation. While skeptics dismiss supernatural phenomena as imagination or hoax, certain documented cases have generated evidence that challenges our understanding of reality itself. These are not Hollywood fabrications or campfire tales, but events witnessed by credible observers, investigated by authorities, and recorded in official documents. Each case left behind physical evidence, multiple witness testimonies, and questions that continue to haunt investigators decades later. If you really like our channel, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more daily horror stories. Thanks. Number 1. Borley Rectory, England's portal to hell. Built in 1862 on the grounds of a former Benedictine monastery, Borley Rectory in Essex was intended to serve as a peaceful home for Anglican clergy. Instead, it became the epicenter of the most extensively documented haunting in British history, generating over 50 years of supernatural activity that defied every attempt at rational explanation. The horror began almost immediately after construction. The first rector, Henry Bull, reported strange phenomena from the moment his family moved into the imposing Victorian structure. Footsteps echoed through empty corridors at night, doors opened and closed without human intervention, and mysterious figures were seen walking through rooms and disappearing through solid walls. The Bull family initially dismissed these occurrences as settling house syndrome, but the phenomena escalated rapidly beyond anything that could be explained by structural issues. Witnesses began reporting the apparition of a nun who walked the grounds at twilight, always following the same path through the rectory garden before vanishing near the ruins of the old monastery. Local legend claimed the nun was a sister from the medieval monastery who had attempted to elope with a monk from the nearby Borley church. According to the story, both lovers were captured and executed. The monk hanged and the nun bricked up alive in the monastery walls. Whether this tale had historical basis remained uncertain, but the ghostly figure matched the traditional description perfectly. The supernatural activity intensified when Harry Price, a renowned psychical researcher, began investigating the rectory in 1929. Price documented phenomena that challenged conventional understanding of paranormal activity. Objects moved without physical cause, strange sounds were recorded on audio equipment, and mysterious writing appeared on walls in languages that predated English occupation of the area. Perhaps most disturbing were the seance sessions Price conducted with medium Helen Duncan. During these communications, entities claiming to be former residents of the monastery provided detailed information about the property's history that was later verified through church records and archaeological evidence. The spirits described hidden chambers, buried artifacts, and structural details about the original monastery that no living person could have known. The case gained international attention when Reverend Lionel Foister and his wife, Mary Ann, moved into the rectory in 1930. The Foister occupancy period produced the most intense supernatural activity ever documented at the location. Mary Ann Foister became the primary target of the phenomena, with entities apparently communicating with her through automatic writing and direct manipulation of her environment. The messages written through Mary Ann revealed a level of intelligence and purpose that suggested the supernatural forces were not merely residual hauntings, but conscious entities with specific agendas. The communications included detailed accounts of medieval monastery life, descriptions of hidden treasures buried on the property, and warnings about future events that later proved accurate. Physical manifestations during the Foister period included objects thrown by invisible hands, furniture rearranging itself overnight, and mysterious fires that ignited without apparent cause. These events were witnessed by dozens of visitors, including journalists, scientists, and church officials who had come to investigate the claims. The rectory's final chapter began in 1939 when the building was severely damaged by fire under mysterious circumstances. The blaze started simultaneously in multiple locations throughout the structure, spreading in patterns that defied natural fire behavior. Witnesses reported seeing the ghostly nun walking through the flames, apparently unaffected by the intense heat. Even after the rectory's destruction, supernatural activity continued on the property. Visitors to the ruins reported encountering the same apparitions that had haunted the original building. Archaeological excavations revealed medieval foundations that matched exactly the descriptions provided by spirits during Price's seances, lending credibility to the supernatural communications. The Borley case generated thousands of pages of documentation, including witness testimonies, photographs, audio recordings, and physical evidence that have been preserved in archives for over 90 years. The consistency of reports across multiple decades and different residents created a historical record unmatched in paranormal research. But the true horror of Borley Rectory lies not in what happened there, but in what it suggests about the nature of certain locations. If some places can serve as permanent doorways between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, then the destruction of buildings means nothing to the forces that inhabit them. The entities at Borley demonstrated that they existed independently of the physical structures, continuing their activities even after their earthly anchor was reduced to ruins. This raises the terrifying possibility that we share our world with invisible territories controlled by consciousnesses that operate according to rules we cannot understand or predict. How many other locations harbor similar supernatural residents, and what happens to people who unknowingly build their homes on ground that belongs to something else entirely? Number 2. The Beast of Bray Road, When Legends Walk on Two Legs. Rural Wisconsin seemed an unlikely setting for encounters with creatures that belonged more in medieval folklore than modern America. But beginning in the late 1980s, Walworth County became the center of documented sightings of a creature that challenged everything witnesses thought they knew about the natural world. The first credible report came from teenager Doristine Gibson, who was driving along Bray Road near Delavan on a cold October night in 1999. Gibson initially thought she had hit a dog with her car and stopped to investigate the damage. What she found examining her vehicle was not a domestic animal, but a creature that defied classification. Standing on its hind legs beside her car was a wolf-like being approximately 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur, and possessing intelligence that was unmistakably human. The creature's eyes reflected her headlights with an intensity that seemed to pierce through her, and its behavior suggested awareness and calculation rather than animal instinct. Gibson reported that the beast examined her vehicle methodically, running its hands, not paws, but distinctly human-like hands with claws, along the car's surface as if assessing damage. The creature showed no fear of the vehicle, the lights, or Gibson herself, suggesting a level of confidence that indicated this was not its first encounter with human technology. The incident might have remained an isolated report, but within months, other drivers began experiencing similar encounters along the same stretch of rural road. Each witness described essentially the same creature, bipedal, wolf-like, but possessing human characteristics that made it far more disturbing than any natural predator. Mark Shackleman, an 18-year-old security guard, provided the most detailed account when he encountered the beast while patrolling a gravel pit near Holy Hill. Shackleman's report included specific details that transformed the case from simple creature sighting to something far more sinister. According to Shackleman, the creature was digging in the ground when he first spotted it, using its clawed hands to excavate something from the earth. When it noticed his approach, the beast stood to its full height and spoke, not in growls or animal sounds, but in recognizable words that sounded like Gadara, repeated several times in what seemed like a warning or territorial declaration. The creature's ability to communicate suggested intelligence that went far beyond animal cognition. Shackleman described its voice as deep and guttural, but unmistakably forming human language concepts. This verbal communication elevated the encounters from wildlife sightings to something that challenged understanding of consciousness and identity. Local law enforcement initially dismissed these reports as misidentification of known animals or hoax attempts. However, the consistency of witness descriptions and the credibility of the individuals making reports forced authorities to take the situation more seriously. Multiple witnesses had no prior knowledge of each other's encounters, yet their descriptions matched with remarkable precision. Physical evidence began accumulating that supported the witness testimonies. Footprint casts were made showing tracks that measured over 12 inches in length, with claw marks and pad impressions that didn't match any known North American wildlife. The prints showed characteristics of both human and canine feet, with an opposable thumb arrangement that suggested manual dexterity. Perhaps most disturbing were the claw marks found on vehicles and property in areas where sightings occurred. These scratches showed a pattern and depth that indicated both incredible strength and deliberate intent. The marks weren't random animal damage, but appeared to be deliberate messages or territorial markings left by an intelligence that understood the significance of human property. Veterinarians and wildlife biologists who examined the physical evidence acknowledged that the prints and claw marks couldn't be attributed to any documented species in the region. The size, configuration, and behavioral implications suggested something that didn't fit established biological categories. The case gained national attention when cryptozoologist Linda Godfrey began systematically investigating the reports. Her research revealed that similar creatures had been encountered throughout Wisconsin and neighboring states for decades, suggesting a population of unknown beings rather than a single anomalous animal. Godfrey's investigation uncovered historical accounts from Native American tribes in the region, who had long-standing traditions about wolf-like beings that could walk upright and possessed supernatural abilities. These traditional stories described creatures that lived in the boundary areas between human civilization and deep wilderness, emerging primarily during times of environmental stress or territorial encroachment. The convergence of contemporary sightings with historical tribal knowledge suggested that the Beast of Bray Road was not a new phenomenon, but part of a larger mystery that had been hidden in the folklore of indigenous communities for generations. The creature's apparent ability to remain largely undetected while living in proximity to human populations indicated sophisticated survival strategies. Modern sightings have continued into the 21st century, with reports following consistent patterns that suggest the creatures have adapted to contemporary human activity. Witnesses describe encounters near vehicles, around farm equipment, and in residential areas, indicating that these beings have learned to navigate the modern landscape while maintaining their elusive nature. But the most terrifying aspect of the Beast of Bray Road isn't its physical appearance or supernatural abilities. It's the intelligence behind its eyes that witnesses consistently report. This is not a mindless predator or confused animal, but something that observes, evaluates, and makes calculated decisions about its interactions with humans. The creatures seem to understand our technology, our behavior patterns, and our vulnerabilities in ways that suggest they have been studying us far longer than we have been encountering them. If beings with this level of intelligence and physical capability have been living undetected in our communities for generations, what does that say about our assumptions of human dominance over the natural world? How many other species of unknown intelligence share our environment, watching and learning while we remain completely unaware of their presence? Number 3. Skinwalker Ranch, where reality breaks down. In the remote Uinta Basin of Utah, the Sherman family purchased what appeared to be an ideal cattle ranch in 1994. The 512-acre property offered vast grazing land, stunning mountain views, and isolation that promised a peaceful rural lifestyle. What they discovered instead was a location where the fundamental laws of physics seemed suspended, and encounters with impossible phenomena became daily reality. The horror began during their first week on the property. Tom Sherman was inspecting fence lines when he noticed several of his cattle gathered in an unusual formation, staring intently at something in the distance. Following their gaze, Sherman saw what appeared to be a massive wolf approaching the herd. But this was no ordinary predator. The creature was nearly twice the size of any wolf Sherman had ever seen, with unusual coloring and proportions that didn't match any known species. Most disturbing was its behavior. Rather than exhibiting typical predator caution, the animal approached the cattle with confidence that suggested familiarity with the property and its inhabitants. Sherman grabbed a rifle and moved closer to get a better look at the creature. As he approached, he realized the animal was even larger than it had appeared from a distance, easily the size of a small horse, but moving with fluid grace that defied its massive frame. The wolf seemed aware of Sherman's presence but showed no fear, instead watching him with intelligence that was unmistakably calculating. When Sherman fired a warning shot, the creature's reaction confirmed that this was no ordinary wildlife encounter. Instead of fleeing, the wolf calmly walked to a nearby tree and seemed to simply disappear. Sherman searched the area extensively but found no tracks, blood, or any evidence that the animal had ever been present. This impossible vanishing act established a pattern that would characterize the Sherman family's 4 years on the property. Objects, animals, and even people would appear and disappear in ways that violated basic physical laws, leaving behind evidence that challenged the family's understanding of reality itself. The phenomena escalated rapidly beyond simple animal encounters. The Shermans began finding their cattle mutilated in ways that defied conventional explanation. The animals were discovered with precise surgical cuts that showed no signs of struggle, bleeding, or predator attack. Internal organs were removed with surgical precision, and the carcasses were often found in locations that should have been impossible for normal predators to access. Perhaps most disturbing were the eyewitness accounts of the mutilations in progress. Family members reported seeing strange lights hovering over cattle, followed by the discovery of animals that had been surgically altered while still alive. The precision of these procedures suggested technology and knowledge that exceeded anything available to human perpetrators. The ranch's electronic equipment began malfunctioning in patterns that suggested intelligent interference, rather than random technical problems. Surveillance cameras would shut down at crucial moments. Audio equipment would record voices speaking in unknown languages, and communication devices would receive transmissions from sources that couldn't be identified or traced. Temperature anomalies appeared throughout the property, with zones of extreme cold that moved independently of weather patterns and persisted regardless of ambient conditions. These cold spots would appear suddenly, last for hours or days, and then vanish without any environmental explanation. The family's encounters with aerial phenomena challenged their understanding of conventional aircraft and natural atmospheric events. They observed craft that displayed flight characteristics impossible for known technology: instantaneous acceleration, silent operation, and the ability to appear and disappear without visible means of propulsion. But perhaps the most terrifying aspects of their experiences involved encounters with entities that seemed to possess shape-shifting abilities consistent with Navajo skinwalker traditions. Family members reported seeing humanoid figures that would transform into animals before their eyes, then revert to human form, while retaining characteristics from both states. These beings demonstrated awareness of the family's activities and seemed to deliberately reveal themselves during moments of maximum psychological impact. They would appear when family members were alone and vulnerable, often mimicking the voices and appearances of people the witnesses knew, creating confusion about what was real and what was supernatural manipulation. The psychological toll of these encounters became severe enough that the Sherman family documented their experiences with video equipment, audio recordings, and written logs that preserved evidence of phenomena that exceeded their ability to understand or explain. Their records showed a consistent escalation of supernatural activity that seemed designed to terrorize rather than simply coexist. The case gained scientific attention when billionaire Robert Bigelow purchased the property in 1996 and established the National Institute for Discovery Science to study the phenomena systematically. NIDS brought sophisticated monitoring equipment and trained researchers to document whatever was occurring on the ranch. The scientific investigation revealed electromagnetic anomalies, radiation signatures, and physical trace evidence that confirmed many of the Sherman family's reports. However, the phenomena seemed to respond to observation, becoming more elusive when researchers attempted to study them directly, as if the entities were aware of being monitored and adjusted their behavior accordingly. NIDS researchers documented over 100 separate incidents during their investigation, including encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena, animal mutilations, poltergeist activity, and sightings of creatures that didn't match any known biological classifications. The scientific team's reports acknowledged that conventional explanations couldn't account for the evidence they had collected. The ranch's current owners continue to report supernatural activity, suggesting that whatever forces inhabit the property are permanent residents rather than temporary visitors. The phenomena show no signs of diminishing over time, and new witnesses continue to encounter the same types of impossible events that terrorized the Sherman family decades ago. The most horrifying implication of Skinwalker Ranch isn't just that supernatural phenomena exist, but that they seem to be concentrated in specific geographic locations where the normal rules of reality simply don't apply. If certain places on Earth function as doorways or thin spots where other dimensions intersect with our own, then the creatures and forces that emerge from these areas operate according to laws we cannot comprehend or predict. The entities at Skinwalker Ranch demonstrate capabilities that suggest they exist partially outside our physical reality, able to manipulate matter, energy, and consciousness in ways that make them essentially omnipotent within their territory. The terrifying question isn't just what these beings want from us, but whether our entire understanding of physics and biology is fundamentally wrong, and whether we live in a universe far stranger and more dangerous than science has ever dared to acknowledge. Number 4. The Black Monk of Pontefract. When the dead refuse to stay buried. The modest council house at 30 East Drive in Pontefract, West Yorkshire, appeared to be an ordinary suburban home when the Pritchard family moved in during the summer of 1966. The property offered nothing unusual in its appearance or history, a simple two-story residence built on what had once been agricultural land. The family had no reason to suspect they were moving into what would become one of the most violent and extensively documented poltergeist cases in European history. The supernatural activity began almost immediately after the family settled into their new home, starting with subtle disturbances that initially seemed like normal household quirks. Light bulbs would burn out rapidly, requiring frequent replacement. Water taps would turn on without human intervention. Cold spots appeared in various rooms, persisting regardless of heating or weather conditions. Jean Pritchard, the family matriarch, initially attributed these oddities to the adjustment period common in older houses. However, the phenomena escalated rapidly beyond anything that could be explained by plumbing problems or electrical issues. The first overtly supernatural event occurred when the family discovered pools of water appearing throughout the house with no apparent source. These puddles would materialize in the middle of rooms, far from any plumbing, and would appear faster than any natural leak could account for. The water was always clean and odorless, suggesting it wasn't coming from sewage or contaminated sources. As the incidents intensified, the family began hearing footsteps in empty rooms, doors slamming without drafts or human contact, and voices speaking in languages none of them recognized. The sounds followed patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose rather than random noise, specific responses to family conversations and deliberate reactions to their daily activities. The case gained credibility when the phenomena began affecting neighbors and visitors who had no prior knowledge of the family's experiences. Police officers responding to disturbance calls witnessed objects moving without physical cause, heard unexplained sounds, and observed temperature changes that violated natural thermal dynamics. The entity manifesting in the house gradually revealed characteristics that identified it as more than a simple poltergeist. Witnesses began reporting sightings of a dark figure wearing monk's robes, always appearing in peripheral vision but vanishing when viewed directly. The apparition moved through the house with familiarity that suggested long-term residence rather than recent arrival. Research into the property's history revealed that the house was built on land that had once been part of the grounds of a Cluniac priory, a medieval monastery that had operated on the site for over 400 years before being dissolved during Henry VIII's Reformation. The monks who had lived and died on the property were buried in consecrated ground that was later built over during modern development. The connection between the current supernatural activity and the site's monastic history became apparent when the entity began demonstrating knowledge of medieval religious practices and Latin liturgy. Witnesses reported hearing chanting in ecclesiastical Latin, smelling incense that appeared from nowhere, and observing religious symbols that materialized on walls and surfaces. But this was no peaceful spiritual presence seeking prayer or remembrance. The entity exhibited violent tendencies that escalated to physical attacks on family members and visitors. People were pushed downstairs, scratched by invisible claws, and lifted off the ground by unseen forces. The attacks showed intelligence and planning, targeting individuals when they were most vulnerable and isolated. Perhaps most terrifying were the entity's apparent abilities to manipulate the physical environment in ways that violated natural laws. Witnesses observed heavy furniture moving across rooms without any visible means of propulsion, objects floating in mid-air for extended periods, and materials appearing and disappearing in impossible ways. The Black Monk demonstrated awareness of modern technology and seemed to take particular pleasure in disrupting electronic equipment. Television sets would change channels independently. Radio broadcasts would be interrupted by voices speaking in archaic dialects, and recording equipment would malfunction whenever attempts were made to document the phenomena. The case attracted investigation by the Society for Psychical Research, whose members documented over 750 separate incidents during their study of the house. Their reports included photographs of objects in motion, audio recordings of unexplained voices, and temperature measurements showing localized atmospheric changes that defied meteorological explanation. The psychological impact on the Pritchard family was severe and long-lasting. The constant threat of supernatural attack created an atmosphere of terror that affected their physical health, mental stability, and social relationships. Family members developed symptoms consistent with chronic stress and trauma, despite their inability to escape or understand the source of their torment. Local church authorities became involved when the family sought spiritual intervention to end the haunting. Multiple exorcism attempts were performed by priests from different denominations, but the entities seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker in response to religious intervention. The black monk appeared to take satisfaction in defying spiritual authority, suggesting a level of malevolence that exceeded simple restless spirit activity. The case continued for over 2 years, with supernatural activity maintaining consistent intensity throughout the family's residence in the house. The entity never showed signs of weakening, departing, or losing interest in its campaign of terror against the living occupants. The Pritchard family eventually moved from the property, but subsequent residents have reported continued supernatural activity, suggesting that the black monk's connection to the location transcends any specific family or time period. The entity appears to be permanently bound to the site where it once lived and died as a mortal being. The most disturbing aspect of the black monk case isn't just the violence and malevolence of the entity, but what it reveals about the permanence of spiritual connections to physical locations. If consciousness can survive death and remain bound to specific places for centuries, then construction and development of land means nothing to the spirits who consider themselves its rightful inhabitants. The black monk's fury seems directed not just at the living, but at the entire modern world that has built over and forgotten the sacred spaces where medieval souls once dedicated their lives to spiritual service. This raises the terrifying possibility that our cities and suburbs are built on foundations of spiritual territory that we have unknowingly invaded, and that the dead who dwell beneath our homes may be growing increasingly angry about their displacement. How many other locations harbor similar entities who are simply waiting for the right moment to reclaim what they believe belongs to them, regardless of how many living people must be terrorized or destroyed in the process? Number 5. The Mothman Prophecies, When Death Has Wings. The industrial town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, seemed an unlikely setting for encounters with prophecy and supernatural warning systems. Located along the Ohio River, the community of 6,000 residents lived quiet lives, centered around chemical plants, family farms, and small-town traditions. Nothing in their experience prepared them for the year of terror that began in November 1966, when something emerged from the shadows that challenged everything they thought they knew about the natural world. The first documented encounter occurred when 2 young couples were driving near the abandoned West Virginia Ordnance Works, a former World War II munitions facility that had been closed since 1945. The couples had decided to explore the desolate area on a lark, expecting nothing more exciting than crumbling buildings and overgrown roads. Instead, they encountered something that defied biological classification. Roger Scarberry, driving with his wife Linda and another couple, first noticed the creature near the facility's old generator plant. In his headlights, he could see a massive figure standing nearly 7 feet tall, but it was the creature's eyes that caused immediate terror. 2 enormous red orbs, each the size of dinner plates, glowed with an intensity that seemed to burn through the darkness. As Scarberry attempted to get a better look, the creature revealed characteristics that violated everything he understood about earthly life forms. The being had wings, not feathered like a bird, but leathery membranes that stretched between elongated appendages. When it took flight, the wingspan appeared to be over 10 feet across, yet the creature moved through the air without making any sound. Most terrifying was the entity's speed and apparent interest in the witnesses. As Scarberry accelerated his car to escape, the creature kept pace effortlessly, flying alongside the vehicle at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. The being seemed to be studying the occupants, its massive red eyes fixed on them with intelligence that was unmistakably aware and calculating. The couples reported the encounter to local police, expecting skepticism, but finding instead that Deputy Sheriff Millard Halstead took their account seriously. Halstead knew the witnesses personally and considered them reliable community members with no history of substance abuse or attention-seeking behavior. Within days, other residents began reporting similar encounters with the same impossible creature. The consistency of descriptions across multiple witnesses created a pattern that local authorities couldn't dismiss as mass hysteria or hoax. Each witness described the same physical characteristics: enormous red eyes, massive wingspan, human-like height, and flight capabilities that exceeded any known bird or aircraft. The entity became known as the Mothman, and sightings continued throughout Point Pleasant and surrounding areas for over a year. However, the creature's appearances seemed to follow patterns that suggested purpose beyond simple animal behavior. Witnesses noted that Mothman sightings often preceded tragic events in the community, as if the entity was somehow connected to impending disasters. Perhaps most disturbing were reports that the creature appeared to individuals who would later become involved in accidents or tragedies. Multiple witnesses claimed that Mothman had appeared to them in the days or weeks before they experienced serious injuries, family deaths, or other traumatic events. The entity seemed to be serving as a harbinger of personal doom for those who encountered it. The supernatural activity in Point Pleasant extended beyond Mothman sightings to include other phenomena that suggested the community had become a focal point for otherworldly attention. Residents reported receiving strange telephone calls with mechanical voices delivering cryptic warnings about future events. Television and radio broadcasts were interrupted by signals that couldn't be traced to any earthly source. UFO sightings increased dramatically during the Mothman period, with witnesses describing craft that displayed flight characteristics similar to the winged entity. These aerial phenomena seem to operate in coordination with Mothman appearances, suggesting a possible connection between the creature and extraterrestrial intelligence. The case attracted national attention when author John Keel arrived to investigate the reports. Keel's research revealed that Point Pleasant was experiencing what he termed a window period, where multiple types of supernatural phenomena occurred simultaneously in a concentrated geographic area. His documentation showed patterns of high strangeness that exceeded typical paranormal activity. Local residents began experiencing prophetic dreams and visions that provided accurate information about future events, particularly disasters and accidents. These precognitive experiences often featured imagery of winged creatures or red-eyed beings, suggesting a connection between Mothman and the community's enhanced psychic sensitivity. The most tragic validation of Mothman's prophetic nature occurred on December 15, 1967, when the Silver Bridge connecting Point Pleasant to Ohio collapsed during rush hour traffic. The disaster killed 46 people and injured dozens more, representing the worst bridge collapse in American history at that time. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Mothman on or near the Silver Bridge in the days leading up to the collapse. The creature's presence seemed to intensify as the disaster approached, with sightings becoming more frequent and the entity's behavior becoming increasingly agitated. Some witnesses interpreted the creature's actions as attempts to warn about the impending tragedy. The bridge collapse marked the end of the Mothman sighting period in Point Pleasant. After over a year of regular encounters, the creature vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind only memories, documentation, and unanswered questions about its nature and purpose. Engineering investigation of the bridge collapse revealed that the disaster was caused by the failure of a single eye-bar in the suspension chain, a component that had developed a tiny crack that went undetected until catastrophic failure occurred. The precision of this failure, one small flaw causing total structural collapse, seemed to match the precise timing of Mothman's disappearance. The correlation between supernatural activity and the disaster raised questions about the relationship between otherworldly entities and human tragedies. Had Mothman been trying to warn the community about the bridge collapse, or was the creature somehow feeding on the psychic energy generated by mass casualties and suffering? The most horrifying aspect of the Mothman encounters isn't the creature's alien appearance or supernatural abilities, but what its presence suggests about the nature of fate and predestination. If entities exist that can perceive future tragedies and choose to appear as harbingers of doom rather than prevent the disasters, what does that say about the role of supernatural forces in human suffering? The witnesses who encountered Mothman received warnings they couldn't understand about deaths they couldn't prevent, suggesting that knowledge of the future may be more curse than blessing. Perhaps the most terrifying possibility is that Some disasters are so inevitable that even supernatural intervention cannot change them, and beings like Mothman serve only as cosmic witnesses to the predetermined destruction of human lives. If our futures are already written in ways that make tragedy unavoidable, then every warning becomes just another form of psychological torture. And every prophecy serves only to increase the suffering of those who must wait helplessly for their predetermined doom to arrive. Thank you for listening. If you really like the stories, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more daily horror stories. Thanks.